Specific language impairment is a communicative disorder which includes stuttering, impaired articulation, voice impairment, and lisp. In this video, we will be investigating how having specific language impairment affects adolescents.
Adolescence is the period of transitional stage from childhood to adulthood, where belonging to collective and social acceptance play a fundamental role in their development. Studies have shown that peer relations, such as close friendships, positive self-concepts, academic achievements, and social competencies highly influence adolescent social identity, social status, and self-esteem. It is a time where the need for effective social and communicative skills becomes essential, as there will be an increased level for social interactions, increased social and communicative activities, self-disclosure, and intimacy in conversations and activities.
To gain a better insight on the effects of speech-language impairments on adolescents, we're going to hear from someone who had a personal experience with a speech impairment. Erica always had a lisp growing up. She was never able to articulate and pronounce certain letters, which really affected the way she perceived herself. So Erica, did you always know you had a speech-language impairment?
No, I knew something was different. In elementary, my teacher would actually make me record myself, and she would listen to the recordings while driving to work, but I didn't really know what she was going to do with the recordings. And it wasn't until I was in grade 5, one of my elementary friends' oldest sibling came up to me and actually approached me and asked me why I was talking like that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She was like, no, you sounded really funny. And then after that, I became very subconscious about it, but I still didn't really know what she was referring to. And then in junior high, one of my other classmates came up to me and started mimicking me. And that was when I realized that, I don't particularly sound normal, even though I can't really hear difference about it. So it made me feel very awkward, like I didn't really fit in. Like I felt very uncomfortable when I have to talk in a big group or even, in front of my peers.
So how did you deal with the issue at the time?
So there are a few different ways that I would cope with it. If there's a certain word I can't pronounce, I would generally try to find another word to substitute it so I don't have to say it out loud. The other coping strategy I would try to avoid any presentations. I would try to avoid pretty much whenever I needed to volunteer to talk in class, I would never volunteer. Whenever we had to go around the room and read a paragraph, I would never volunteer for that. And if I have to do it, then I will become very, very subconscious about it, to a point where my teachers would actually think I'm shy, but I'm actually not very shy. I just didn't want people to notice that I had a speech impairment. So that has always bothered me until I was able to get a really good speech pathologist, and she's currently trying to help me correct my lisp, and I'm more comfortable with talking.
So, how does having specific language impairment affect adolescents?
In 2002, a study was conducted to better understand self-esteem in individuals with specific language impairments. Self-esteem is how we perceive ourselves. It is how we view our worth as a person. While positive self-esteem will help foster and assist them in working through difficult times, promote personal growth, and adjust to environment demands, negative self-esteem can have an adverse effect on children and adolescents. The study involved 34 individuals between the ages of 10 and 13. This group consisted of an equal number of adolescents with specific language impairments and their typically developing peers. The Self-Perception Profile for Children, or SPPC, was administered to these adolescents. It identifies the child's sense of self-adequacy in different domains and assesses the child's sense of global self-esteem or self-worth. The results suggest that adolescents with specific language impairment had a lower self-esteem compared to their peers with typical language development. They perceived themselves more negatively across domains on both scholastic competence and social acceptance. If the perceived self-esteem is influenced by specific language impairments, what other effects does specific language impairments have on adolescents?
A 2011 study examined self-reports of bullying, self-esteem, life orientation, and satisfaction with life for students who stutter. Bullying is a form of aggressive behavior in which someone deliberately and repeatedly does hurtful things to another person through various actions, such as physical contact, teasing, words, or more subtle actions. This study involved 54 students between the ages of 13 to 18 who stuttered, and 54 students of the same age who did not stutter. Participants were tested individually using 4 scales. In particular, the bully victimization scale was used to evaluate bullying and victimization among peers in or near school settings. The researchers found that students who stuttered were more likely to be victimized by bullies than the students who did not stutter. These students who reported greater victimization also reported low self-esteem, less optimistic life orientation, and lower satisfaction in life. Studies show that adolescents with specific language impairment are more likely to be bullied in comparison to their typically developing counterparts because they're negatively stereotyped as being more insecure, isolated, shy, anxious, and non-assertive. This exemplifies that positive peer relations serve an important role in adolescents' personal and social development.
A study in 2013 was conducted to understand adolescents with specific language impairments and their self-perceived strengths and difficulties in social functioning. One component the study examined was peer relations. 139 adolescents were involved in the study. Participants completed a 25 items behavioral questionnaire. The questionnaire was divided into 5 subscales, in which one particularly focused on peer problems. The study concluded that difficulty with peer relations was a strong differentiator between the 2 groups studied. Difficulties with peer relations in adolescents with specific language impairment was found to be 12 times higher than that of their typically developing peers.
So, what do these studies tell us?
Adolescents with specific language impairments perceive themselves more negatively on scholastic competence and social acceptance, have poorer peer relations, and are more susceptible to be bullied. These impacts may have implications later into adulthood.
Stanley Fisher, a law professor who stuttered, professed that he often went home with shame, guilt, and pummeled self-esteem because he believed his students deserved to be taught by someone who does not stutter. Although his speech impediment is mild, he perceived that he would become inarticulate. He would find various ways to conceal his impediment by substituting words, had others order food for him, avoided conferences, and declined invitations to speak. He even dropped his first-year criminal law class because of the stress level. The sense of shame, embarrassment, and self-perception of not fitting in, which both Erica and Stanley experienced with speech impediment, support the results presented in the current articles. We can therefore conclude that specific language impairment does impact adolescents, namely their relationships with their peers, perceived self-worth, and their susceptibility to being bullied may have huge ramifications and can affect their daily lives in later stages of adulthood.
While the current studies provide data to validate this, we must remember that there are limitations to the data collected. For example, the current study on perceived self-worth is cross-sectional, not longitudinal. It would be beneficial to assess if perceived low self-worth will change over time to help determine the types of coping strategies to correct this. Other limitations include small sample sizes, reliability of the methods and tests used, or the narrow ethnicity or economic status of participants. All these factors may have affected the results of the current studies.
It is important to conduct further research to understand the impact of specific language impairment on adolescent development. There may be implications that stronger awareness and intervention may be necessary to promote a more satisfactory and optimistic life orientation for adolescents with specific language impairment. With proper interventions, ongoing perceived poor self-esteem could be reduced for these individuals. It will help provide them with coping skills to deal with stress-related matters and personal unease.